that, this question of irrigation timing has come up. And along with this site here at Scandia, it's back there, there's another site at Topeka as well. Along with those field sites, we also did, Tina and I did, a grower survey for irrigated soybean farmers here in Kansas as well. Looking at this, we had we had our treatments for planting date, maturity group, and irrigation timing. So we were looking at 2 treatments for our planting date, maturity group, and irrigation timing. The planting date, we had our early planting date here in early May, and then our later planting date was in late May or early June, kind of depending on when rain would hit us. As for our maturity groups, our early maturity group was 3.7 or 3.9, and then our late maturity group was a 4.2, all of which are the golden harvest varieties. For our irrigation timing, we had an early timing and a late timing. So for our early timing, this is really to try and hit the first part of the reproductive stages for soybeans. And it's a little bit difficult to do that because we have our planting dates and our maturity groups kind of jumbled up. So we're always going to get them kind of at different stages. So our first irrigation timing this year was July 15th. This is kind of when our soybeans were in that starting to bloom, full bloom stage. And then 2 to 3 weeks later, kind of around this time, we've switched over to that second irrigation. And basically what happens here is we have an irrigation that has a variable rate system, meaning that we can have water applied to all of the plots at once, but if we want to focus on one particular area, we can. So one side would get more water applied than the other area, with the early irrigation plots getting 1 1/4 of an inch, and the later irrigation, they would still get water, but it'd be 3/4 of an inch. And then when we hit that pod setting, pod filling stage, we switch over, and the later irrigation gets that more application of water. Along with these, we collected several different kinds of data. We did canopy measurements to look at productivity for these plots, and this can kind of tell us what water efficiency we have for these plots. As you can see here, let's see. For the weather of this year, we did have relatively cool, relatively wetter season than normal, and most of our rain was in the beginning of June, kind of towards the end of July as well. And the canopy closure, so along with this, we took the canopy closure measurements. This tells us productivity, and you guys can do this too. You just take your phone kind of like this, snap a photo right in the middle of the plot, and you upload it to an app called Canopeo that tells you the green canopy coverage. We did these for all the plots, and you can see a visual difference in the maturity group treatments and the planting date treatments. The maturity group, our later maturity group had a greater increase in our canopy coverage, and our early planting date had a greater increase in our canopy coverage, which makes sense because the vegetative growth for the later maturity would be more than the early maturity group. As well as the canopy coverage, right before harvest, we're going to be taking weed samples for all of the plots. We're going to do lodging rates as well, and take 8 soybean plants with their roots intact back to the lab. When we're at the lab, we look at the soybeans and sort the beans based on what damage they have, and this can kind of tell us what the pest occurrence is. If it's a twisted pod, it is an indication of stink bug damage, and if it has a hole in the pod, it was an indication of podworm damage. I do have some examples here that you guys can pass around. So these huge honkin' bags, they are an early planting date, and this 102, this one is our early maturity group, and this is our late maturity group. It was also counted as podworm damage. It was interesting to see that the 2025 season, so last year on the other page, our early planting date was still early May, but we did have to push that later planting date because of rains. So we're glad we got those beans this year planted in a little bit earlier for our late planting date. Maturity groups are a little bit different, but that's just how it goes. And we also had to move back our irrigation timing because of those late July, mid-July rains. We had to push back the irrigation timing, but relatively the same in terms of that 1.25 inch for water and the other irrigation treatment as well. Now this last year we were also able to see the canopy closure showed similar results to what's been showing this year with our late maturity group and our early planting date having greater canopy closure. And you can kind of see it right now in the field if you go over there, that all of them have kind of caught up in canopy closure, which is what it showed last year, that in the middle of August, all of them caught up in canopy closure. As for our harvest details that we got a lot of foxtails last year, but there wasn't a difference in the treatments for irrigation, planting date, or maturity group. But we did see a difference in our stink bug damage pods. And this kind of goes to show that we need to be pairing up our maturity groups and our planting dates together. For example, in this one, our highest damage plots were the ones that were late plant and late maturity group. But if you see the combinations of the early planting date, late maturity group, late planting date, early maturity group, those were the least affected ones. As for the diseases, how we found those was by snipping the end of the soybean roots when we got back to the lab, seeing if it had charcoal rot. If the pith was discolored, we would consult our plant pathologist to see if they thought it might be SDS, and we also looked for decties. And although we saw a lot of decties and charcoal root rot, there wasn't a lot of lodging noticed. And this could be either that we got hit later in the season, or the densities weren't big enough to affect the lodging rates. After harvest, we collected the seeds and we did an assessment on the composition. So this would be the oil and protein. For our oil and protein, we saw a difference in our planting date and our maturity groups, with our early planting date having more oil and our early maturity group also having more oil. For our protein, we saw that it was affected by irrigation, planting date, and maturity group. For the yield and test weight, we also saw that there was a difference between irrigation, planting date, and maturity group, with the higher yields having lower test weight and vice versa. I'm really interested to see if we see a greater difference for our irrigation treatments, because the irrigation treatments were pushed into August, and now we get to see what it looks like starting in July. But does anyone have any questions?